I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through old photos on my laptop, a glass of whiskey in hand. It was a quiet evening, the kind of night where nothing seemed out of place. The gentle hum of the ceiling fan and the distant sound of crickets outside the window were the only sounds that filled the room. I was simply reliving memories, pictures from vacations, family gatherings, and random snapshots of life. Then, I stumbled upon a folder I didn't recognize. It was buried deep within my photo archives. A folder labeled innocuously as Work Event 2022. Curious, I clicked on it, expecting to see photos from one of Jessica's corporate outings. Instead, what appeared on the screen was an image that sent a cold shock through my body. There was Jessica, my wife of 10 years, in the arms of another man, a man I'd never seen before. They were at what looked like a party, laughing, his hands on her waist, her lips on his. For a moment, I just sat there, frozen. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. I blinked, shook my head, and scrolled through the rest of the folder. Each photo told the same story. Jessica and this stranger at various locations, restaurants, parks, and even what looked like a cozy cabin in the woods. The way they looked at each other, the intimacy, the casual affection, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. No, this can't be real, I muttered to myself, trying to grasp at any shred of hope that this was some sort of mistake or joke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The details were too vivid, the emotions too raw. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears as if to remind me of the bitter truth staring back at me from the screen. I was being betrayed. The woman I loved, the woman I had built a life with, was cheating on me. In the days that followed, I tried to act normal, but every time I looked at Jessica, my mind replayed those images. I couldn't ask her about it, not yet. I needed to be sure, needed to see with my own eyes. So, I started watching her more closely, looking for signs, anything that could confirm or, God willing, deny what I had found. At first, everything seemed as it always had been. She went to work, came home, we had dinner together. But now, there was a layer of deceit that tainted every interaction. I noticed how she would sometimes linger on her phone, quickly putting it away when I entered the room. There were new outfits, expensive ones, that she didn't have an explanation for. And then there were the late nights at the office. Nights that had suddenly become more frequent. It wasn't long before I began to see the cracks. One evening, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone and, with shaking hands, scrolled through her messages. Most of them were innocuous, from friends or colleagues. But then, there were the ones from Tom. My blood ran cold as I read through the messages. The words "miss you," "can't wait to see you," and "last night was amazing" seared into my brain like a brand. I had my proof. This Tom was the man from the photos, the man who was taking my place in Jessica's heart. That night, I barely slept. My mind was a whirlpool of anger, pain, and the dark desire for revenge. I couldn't confront her, not yet. Confronting her meant ending it, and I wasn't ready for that. I needed to know more, to see how far this had gone, and, perhaps more importantly, I needed to decide how I was going to make her pay for what she had done. But there was no going back now. I had crossed a threshold. And the man I was before that night was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder. Jessica had made her choice, and now I would make mine. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and obsession. Every smile she gave me felt like a lie, every touch a betrayal. I had to know how deep this went, how long she had been deceiving me. I began following Jessica, pretending I had errands to run when she left for work. I kept my distance, watching as she moved through her day. On Friday, she mentioned she had to stay late at the office. My pulse quickened at the excuse I knew was a lie. I followed her, careful not to be seen. Instead of heading to her office, she drove to a quiet neighborhood, parking outside a small, upscale restaurant. As I watched from my car, a man approached her. Tall, well-dressed, with a confident stride, Tom. They embraced like lovers who hadn't seen each other in weeks. Seeing them together, the reality of her betrayal hit me with full force. They entered the restaurant, and I waited in the darkness. My mind racing with thoughts of confrontation, of exposing her lies right then and there. But I held back, knowing I wasn't ready to face her. Not yet. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the restaurant, laughing as they walked down the street hand in hand. They stopped outside a nearby hotel, and my stomach turned as Tom led her inside. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The rage and humiliation were unbearable, but I knew I needed to stay calm. When Jessica finally returned home late that night, I was waiting for her, pretending to be half asleep on the couch. She smiled at me, the same smile I had fallen in love with years ago, but now it felt like a mask, a facade hiding the truth. I asked her about her day, and she lied effortlessly, telling me how tiring work had been. I nodded, playing along, knowing that soon enough, the truth would come crashing down on her. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of disgust and anger gnawing at me. It was time to take control of the situation. I began planning my revenge, carefully considering every detail. It had to be perfect, cold, calculated, and devastating. I needed to make her believe I was none the wiser, so I continued playing the role of the unsuspecting husband. I started preparing for a business trip, a fake one, to give me the perfect cover for what I was about to do. I told Jessica I would be gone for the weekend, and she pretended to be disappointed, though I knew it was exactly what she wanted, more time with Tom. On the day of my supposed departure, I kissed her goodbye, feeling the bile rise in my throat as I touched her. I drove around for a while, ensuring she thought I was really gone, then returned home, parking a few blocks away. I let myself into the house and began setting up hidden cameras, placing them in spots that would capture everything without being seen. I had become a stranger in my own home, turning it into a trap for the woman I once trusted with my life. Satisfied with my preparations, I left the house, taking up a position nearby where I could see the front door. It didn't take long for Tom to arrive. He strolled up to the house, confident and smug, as if he belonged there. The sight of him walking through my front door was almost too much to bear, but I forced myself to stay calm. Hours passed, and I watched as the lights inside the house flickered on and off. I imagined them together, laughing, sharing secrets, making love in the same bed where Jessica and I had shared so many moments of our own. The pain was unbearable, but it fueled my resolve. Finally, just before midnight, Tom left, and I slipped back into the house. Jessica was asleep, looking peaceful and content, as if nothing in the world could disturb her. I quietly retrieved the footage from the cameras, my heart pounding as I watched the recordings on my laptop. There it was, undeniable evidence of her betrayal. I felt a strange sense of calm as I began editing the footage, carefully selecting the most incriminating moments. I added the photos I had found and the text messages from her phone, creating a damning montage of her affair with Tom. It was time to confront her, but not before I ensured everyone else knew the truth. The following morning, I woke up with a sense of grim determination. Today was the day everything would change. I had spent most of the night perfecting the video, making sure every moment of Jessica's betrayal was captured in vivid detail. Now, it was time to set my plan into motion. I waited until Jessica had left for work before sending the video to everyone we knew, friends, family, and even some of her colleagues. I attached a short message. This is the truth behind our marriage. I imagined the shock and disbelief that would spread through our social circle, but that was exactly what I wanted. Jessica had shattered my world, and now I was going to shatter hers. When she returned home that evening, she was unusually quiet. I could tell something was off, but I didn't let on. We went through the motions of dinner, the tension between us thickening with each passing minute. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she put down her fork and looked at me with a strange mix of fear and confusion. "David, did something happen today?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her, feeling a cold satisfaction. "Why don't you tell me, Jessica?" I said, my tone icy. She hesitated, searching my face for any hint of what I knew. When she didn't find it, she shook her head. I've been getting strange messages all day. From friends, even my boss. They're asking me if everything is okay, but they won't tell me why. Maybe they know something you don't want to admit, I replied, my voice laced with bitterness. Her eyes widened as the realization hit her. She stood up quickly, almost knocking over her chair in her haste. What did you do, David? She demanded, her voice rising. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, sliding it across the table toward her. Watch, I said simply. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and pressed play. As the video unfolded, I watched her expression change, from confusion to shock, then to horror, and finally, to utter devastation. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy, no pity. When the video ended, she just stood there, staring at the screen in disbelief. How could you do this? She whispered, her voice breaking. How could I do this? I repeated, anger flaring inside me. How could you do this, Jessica? How could you betray me like that? She collapsed into the chair, covering her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood up, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. We're done, I said quietly. I've already filed for divorce. I want you out of this house by the end of the week. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen, but there was nothing left to say. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to the wreckage of her own making. The days that followed were chaotic, filled with the aftermath of my actions. Word of Jessica's affair spread quickly, and the fallout was immediate and brutal. Our friends were divided. Some reached out to offer their support, while others distanced themselves, not wanting to be caught in the middle of the scandal. Jessica, once the center of our social circle, became a pariah. Her phone was constantly buzzing with calls and messages, but she ignored most of them. The few times she did answer, I overheard her trying to explain herself, trying to salvage what little dignity she had left. But the damage was done. Her reputation was in ruins. At work, things were no better. Her boss called her in for a meeting, and though I didn't know the details, I could tell from her expression when she returned that it hadn't gone well. The affair with Tom had crossed professional boundaries, and now she was facing the consequences. It wasn't long before she was asked to resign, effectively ending her career. Meanwhile, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had been living in a nightmare for weeks, but now that it was out in the open, I could finally begin to move on. I started packing up my things, preparing to leave the house that had once been our home. The memories we had built together were now tainted, and I couldn't bear to stay there any longer. Jessica tried to talk to me a few times, pleading for forgiveness and begging me to reconsider the divorce. But I was done. I had given her my trust and my love, and she had thrown it all away. There was no going back. I needed to get away, to start fresh somewhere far from the pain she had caused. On the day she moved out, I watched her load the last of her belongings into her car. She paused before getting in, looking back at me with tear-filled eyes. "David, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She got into the car and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the driveway, the silence of the empty house behind me. That evening, I poured myself a drink and sat on the porch, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and red, the colors of a day ending, of a chapter closing. As I sat there, I thought about everything that had happened, about the life I had lost and the new one I was about to begin. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing for certain: I was free. And that, at least, was something. In the weeks that followed, life took on a strange, hollow rhythm. The house was eerily quiet, devoid of the sounds of Jessica's laughter, her music, and the countless little things that had once filled it with life. But the emptiness was a relief, a sanctuary from the chaos that had consumed my world. I spent my days at work, burying myself in projects and deadlines, anything to keep my mind off the painful memories. My colleagues, who had heard whispers of what had happened, were kind but distant, unsure of how to approach me. I didn't mind the isolation, it gave me space to think and to process everything. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the house, with nothing but the ticking clock and the shadows for company, the weight of my decisions would sometimes press down on me. I would replay the events over and over, questioning whether I had done the right thing and whether there had been another way. But each time, I reminded myself that this was the path Jessica had chosen, not me. She had betrayed us, and there was no going back. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a drink in hand, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Hesitating for a moment, I answered. It was Tom. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he tried to explain himself. He claimed that the affair had started out of loneliness, that he hadn't meant to hurt anyone. It was a pathetic attempt at justification. And I felt a surge of anger as he spoke. But I didn't let it show. I listened silently, letting him ramble on until he finally ran out of words. You think you can just say sorry and make it all better? I said, my voice steady. You destroyed my marriage. You ruined my life. And now you're trying to clear your conscience? Tom was silent for a moment, and I could hear the guilt in his voice when he finally responded. I never meant for it to go this far, David. I'm truly sorry. Save your apologies. I replied coldly. They mean nothing to me. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Just like Jessica. I ended the call, feeling a mix of satisfaction and bitterness. It was the last time I heard from him, and that was fine by me. He was just another part of the past I needed to leave behind. As the months passed, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I sold the house. There were too many memories there, too many ghosts, and moved to a new city, far away from the places where everything had fallen apart. It was a fresh start, a chance to leave the pain behind and begin anew. I found a small apartment downtown, nothing fancy, but it was mine. It was a place where I could finally start to heal, to figure out who I was without Jessica. I began exploring the city, discovering new cafes, parks, and walking paths that became my new routine. Slowly, the wounds started to heal. One day, as I was sitting in a coffee shop, I noticed a woman across the room. She was reading a book, her brow furrowed in concentration. Completely absorbed in the story. There was something about her that drew me in, something genuine and unpretentious. She caught me staring and smiled, a warm, friendly smile that reached her eyes. We struck up a conversation, and I learned her name was Megan. She was a graphic designer and recently moved to the city herself. We talked for hours that day, about everything and nothing, and it felt good, refreshing, even, to connect with someone new. We began seeing each other more often, meeting for coffee or dinner, and taking long walks through the city. Megan was different from Jessica in so many ways, honest, straightforward, with no hidden agendas. She didn't push me to talk about my past, but when I finally did, she listened without judgment, offering only support. It wasn't long before I realized that I was beginning to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a future for me after all. A future where I wasn't defined by the pain and betrayal I had endured, but by the choices I made moving forward. Megan and I grew closer, and though I was careful not to rush into anything, I couldn't deny the connection we had. It was different from what I had with Jessica, simpler, less complicated. It was exactly what I needed. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment one evening, looking out at the city lights, I realized that I had finally started to let go. The anger, the bitterness, the desire for revenge, they had all begun to fade, replaced by a sense of peace. I was no longer trapped in the past, I was free to create my own future, one where I could be happy again. And so, I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs, and stepped back inside, ready to embrace whatever came next. As the days turned into weeks, Megan and I grew closer, our bond deepening with each passing moment. We spent our weekends exploring the city together, discovering hidden gems in old bookstores, or simply sitting in the park, watching the world go by. It was the kind of simplicity I had craved, a stark contrast to the chaotic turmoil that had defined my life for so long. One afternoon, as we were walking along the riverfront, Megan suddenly stopped and turned to me, a serious look in her eyes. "David, I've been thinking about us." My heart skipped a beat. I knew this conversation was coming, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it. "What about us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "I know you've been through a lot, and I don't want to push you into anything you're not ready for. But I really care about you, David. And I want to know where we stand." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes, and felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, affection, and something that felt a lot like love. Megan had been a light in my darkness, a source of comfort and stability when I needed it most. But she was right, we needed to be honest with each other about where this was going. "I care about you too, Megan," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. "More than I ever thought I could care about someone again. But I've been through so much, and I don't want to rush into anything. I want to do this right, for both of us." She nodded, her expression softening. "I understand. And I'm willing to take things slow. I just needed to know that we're on the same page." "We are," I assured her, reaching out to take her hand. "And I'm willing to give us, a real chance." We stood there for a moment, holding hands, the sound of the river flowing gently in the background. It was a quiet, unspoken agreement, a promise to each other that we would face whatever came next together. As my relationship with Megan blossomed, I found myself thinking more and more about the life I had left behind. It wasn't that I missed it, far from it, but there were still loose ends, unresolved feelings that I needed to confront if I was ever going to fully move on. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I received a message from Jessica. It was the first time she had reached out since our last encounter, and seeing her name on my phone brought back a flood of memories. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what she could possibly want. Her message was brief: "Can we talk? There are things I need to say." Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave the past where it belonged. But another part of me knew that this was something I needed to face. I needed closure. And perhaps, so did she. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe we used to frequent. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking nervous and out of place. As I approached, she looked up, and I saw the same old familiar face, but now it was marked by sadness and regret. "David," she greeted me softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Jessica," I replied, taking a seat across from her. We sat in awkward silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," she began, breaking the silence. "I know what I did was unforgivable, and I don't expect you to ever forgive me. But I needed to see you, to say that I'm sorry. Truly sorry." I listened quietly, letting her speak. It was clear that the months since our divorce had taken a toll on her. She looked tired and worn down, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. "I don't know why I did what I did," she continued, her voice trembling. "I was selfish, and I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. I've lost everything because of my choices. My job, my friends, and most of all, you." I took a deep breath, feeling the old anger and resentment bubbling up inside me. But instead of letting it consume me, I chose a different path. "Jessica, what you did broke me. It tore apart everything we had built together. But holding on to that anger, that pain, it's not who I want to be anymore." She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. But she didn't say anything. I could see that she was waiting for me to continue, to give her some kind of absolution. I'm not saying I forgive you, I said slowly. But I'm choosing to let go. I'm choosing to move on, for my own sake. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward. Jessica nodded, wiping away her tears. Thank you, David. I don't deserve it, but thank you. We sat there for a while longer, talking about nothing in particular, the heavy atmosphere between us slowly dissipating. When we finally parted ways, there was a sense of finality, a feeling that the chapter we had shared was truly over. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The past no longer had a hold on me, and I was free to embrace the future with open arms. I returned to my apartment that evening, where Megan was waiting for me. As I walked through the door, she looked up from the book she was reading, her face lighting up with a smile. Hey, she said warmly, setting the book aside. How did it go? It went well, I replied, sitting down beside her. Better than I expected. I think I'm finally ready to let it all go. She reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I'm glad, David. You deserve to be happy. As I looked into her eyes, I knew she was right. I had faced the demons of my past, and now I was ready to embrace the life that lay ahead, a life filled with new beginnings, new love, and the promise of happiness. Life with Megan had become something beautiful, something that felt almost too good to be true. We continued to grow closer, finding comfort in each other's presence. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future worth looking forward to. But as the weeks passed, I realized that while I had made peace with Jessica's betrayal, I hadn't fully dealt with the aftermath. I still carried the scars of what had happened, and they affected the way I approached my relationship with Megan. I was cautious, always waiting for the other shoe to drop, as if expecting her to suddenly betray me too. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to me. One evening, as we were sitting together in the living room, I decided it was time to confront my fears. I turned to Megan, who was curled up beside me with a book in her lap. Megan, I need to talk to you about something, I said, my voice hesitant. She looked up, concern flickering across her face. Of course, David. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. I've been holding back, with us. Ever since Jessica, I've been afraid of getting too close, of letting myself trust again. I don't want to lose what we have, but I'm scared that if I let my guard down, I'll get hurt again. Megan set her book aside and shifted closer to me, taking my hand in hers. David, I understand. You've been through so much, and it's only natural to be cautious. But I'm not Jessica. I'm not going to betray you. I care about you, and I want to build something real with you. I know, I said quietly, looking into her eyes. And I believe you. But I need to let go of this fear if we're going to move forward. I need to learn how to trust again. She smiled softly, squeezing my hand. We'll take it one day at a time. I'm not going anywhere, David. I'm here for the long haul. Her words brought a sense of relief, and I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. I realized then that I had been given a second chance. An opportunity to love and be loved again. And I wasn't going to let my past hold me back. From that moment on, I made a conscious effort to open up more, to let Megan in. We spent more time together, not just as a couple, but as partners, sharing our hopes, our fears, and our dreams. And slowly, the walls I had built around myself began to crumble. As the months passed, Megan and I continued to build our life together. The trust between us grew stronger with each passing day, and I found myself embracing the happiness that had once seemed so elusive. One day, as we were having breakfast on a sunny Saturday morning, Megan suddenly looked up from her plate, a thoughtful expression on her face. David, she began, her tone tentative, have you ever thought about what the future might look like for us? Where we're headed? I set down my coffee cup, intrigued by the question. I have, I admitted. I think about it a lot, actually. Why do you ask? She hesitated for a moment, then continued. I've been thinking about us moving in together. I know it's a big step, and I don't want to rush you, but it feels right, doesn't it? The idea of living with Megan had crossed my mind more than once. We spent so much time together already, and the thought of coming home to her every day filled me with a sense of warmth and contentment. But there was still a part of me that hesitated, a part that was afraid of repeating the past. I looked into Megan's eyes and saw nothing but love and sincerity. She had been patient with me, understanding of my fears. And I realized that this was the next step I needed to take if I was going to fully move forward. "You're right," I said with a smile. "It does feel right. Let's do it." Her face lit up with joy, and she leaned over to kiss me. "I'm so happy, David. I can't wait to start this new chapter with you." Over the next few weeks, we began the process of merging our lives. We found a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, with enough space for both of us to feel at home. Moving in together was a whirlwind of packing, unpacking, and organizing, but it was also filled with excitement and anticipation for the future we were creating. As we settled into our new home, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't known in a long time. The memories of my past were still there, but they no longer haunted me. Instead, they had become a part of my story, a chapter that had shaped me but no longer defined me. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, Megan resting her head on my shoulder, I looked around at the life we had built. It was simple and unremarkable in many ways, but it was ours, and that made it perfect. "I love you, Megan," I said softly, the words coming easily now, without hesitation or fear. She smiled up at me, her eyes shining with happiness. "I love you too, David. More than anything." And in that moment, I knew that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along: peace, love, and a future worth living for. The darkness of my past had faded, replaced by the light of a new beginning. And I was ready to embrace it with open arms. Life with Megan was everything I had hoped for and more. We had created a comfortable routine in our new apartment, filled with shared moments of laughter, support, and quiet contentment. It felt like I was finally living the life I deserved, a life free from the shadows of the past. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds, and ours was no exception. One evening, as we were winding down after a long day, Megan received a phone call. I could tell from the look on her face that something was wrong. She excused herself and took the call in the other room, leaving me alone in the living room with a sense of unease. When she returned, her expression was troubled. She sat down beside me, her hands fidgeting nervously. "David," she began slowly, "that was my ex, Mark. He's been going through a tough time, and he reached out to me for support. We were together for a long time, and he doesn't have many people to turn to. He asked if we could meet up and talk." I felt a knot form in my stomach at the mention of her ex. It wasn't jealousy, exactly. Megan had always been open about her past, and I knew she was committed to our relationship. But the thought of her spending time with someone she had once loved stirred up old insecurities and fears that I thought I had put to rest. "Are you okay with that?" she asked, sensing my discomfort. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I trust you, Megan. But I'd be lying if I said it doesn't bother me a little. It's just, I've been hurt before, and I don't want to go through that again." She reached out and took my hand, her grip reassuring. "I understand, David. And I promise you, this isn't about rekindling anything with Mark. I care about him as a friend, but my heart is with you. I just want to help him through a tough time." I nodded, knowing that this was a test, not just of our relationship, but of my ability to trust again. Megan had never given me a reason to doubt her, and I didn't want to let my past dictate my future. "Okay," I said finally. "Meet with him. But please, just be honest with me about how it goes." She smiled, relieved. "I will, David. Thank you for understanding." A few days later, Megan met up with Mark, and I spent the evening trying to keep myself busy, distracting my mind from the nagging worries that crept in. When she returned home, she immediately sat down with me, ready to talk. "It went well," she said, her voice calm. "Mark is going through a lot, but I made it clear that I'm with you now. And that's not going to change." He was respectful, and I think he understands. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I knew that I had passed the test. Trusting Megan had been the right choice, and it strengthened our bond even more. As the weeks turned into months, the incident with Mark faded into the background, and Megan and I continued to build our life together. The love we shared had grown deeper and stronger, and I found myself thinking about the future more and more. One evening, as we were sitting on the balcony watching the sunset, I realized that I couldn't imagine my life without her. The thought of spending the rest of my days with Megan filled me with a sense of joy and certainty that I had never felt before. I knew what I needed to do. The next day, I took a walk downtown, visiting a small jewelry store that I had passed by many times before. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a kind smile, welcomed me in and showed me a selection of engagement rings. As I looked at the rings, I thought about everything Megan and I had been through together, the challenges we had faced, the love we had nurtured, and the future we were building. I chose a simple, elegant ring that I knew would suit her perfectly. The day I proposed, I planned a quiet evening at home, just the two of us. I cooked her favorite meal and set the table with candles and flowers. Megan noticed the extra effort and smiled, clearly touched by the gesture. After dinner, as we were enjoying dessert, I took a deep breath and reached into my pocket, feeling the small velvet box. My heart was racing, but I knew this was the right moment. "Megan," I began, my voice steady despite the nerves, "these past few years with you have been the happiest of my life. You've shown me what love really is, and I can't imagine my life without you. You've made me a better man, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me." I stood up and moved around the table, getting down on one knee in front of her. Megan's eyes widened in surprise, and I saw the tears start to form as she realized what was happening. "I love you, Megan," I continued, opening the box to reveal the ring. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, there was silence, and then she nodded, tears spilling over as she smiled. "Yes, David. Yes, I will." I slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled me into a tight embrace, her happiness radiating through every part of me. At that moment, I knew that all the pain and heartache of the past had been worth it because it had led me to her. As we held each other, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt a deep sense of peace. This was where I was meant to be, with the woman I loved, ready to embark on the next chapter of our lives together. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. The day of our wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect day that felt like a blessing from the universe. Megan and I had chosen to keep things simple, a small ceremony with just close friends and family, followed by an intimate reception at a charming, rustic venue just outside the city. It was exactly what we wanted, a day that reflected who we were as a couple, unpretentious, genuine, and full of love. As I stood at the altar, waiting for Megan, I felt a mix of emotions that was almost overwhelming. The journey that had brought me here, the pain, the heartbreak, the rebuilding, flashed through my mind, and I realized how far I had come. I was no longer the man who had been shattered by betrayal. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace a future filled with love and happiness. The music began to play, and I looked up to see Megan walking down the aisle. She was breathtaking, her dress flowing around her like a soft cloud, her face glowing with joy. Our eyes met, and in that moment, everything else faded away. It was just the two of us, together, ready to make the most important promise of our lives. When she reached me, we took each other's hands, and I felt the warmth and strength of her love radiating through her touch. The officiant began to speak, but I barely heard the words. All I could focus on was Megan and the overwhelming gratitude I felt for having her in my life. We exchanged vows, simple but heartfelt, words that spoke to the journey we had shared and the future we were committed to building together. As I slipped the ring onto her finger, I felt a sense of completion, like everything in my life had been leading to this moment. "You may now kiss the bride," the officiant said with a smile. And I leaned in, sealing our vows with a kiss that was met with applause and cheers from our loved ones. The reception that followed was a blur of laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Our friends and family showered us with love and well wishes, and as the night wore on, I found myself looking around the room, taking it all in. This was our life now, surrounded by people who cared for us and shared in our joy. As the evening wound down, Megan and I slipped away from the crowd, finding a quiet spot outside under the stars. We sat together, her head resting on my shoulder, the cool night air a refreshing contrast to the warmth of the day. "I can't believe we're married," she said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "Neither can I," I replied with a smile, my heart swelling with love for her. "But I'm so glad we are." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply enjoying the moment. The future stretched out before us, full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. "This is just the beginning," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Our new chapter." Megan looked up at me, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "And I can't wait to see what it brings." We shared another kiss under the stars, the world around us fading away until there was nothing but the two of us, wrapped in each other's arms, ready to face whatever came next. It had been a long, difficult journey to get here, but as I held Megan close, I knew that every step had been worth it. This was our life now, a life filled with love, trust, and the promise of a future we would build together, one day at a time. As we walked back into the warmth and light of our wedding celebration, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, hand in hand, ready for anything.